Hello everybody, my name is Jeff Barnia. There was a different type of baseball bat which was accepted for use in the major leagues back in 2010. This acceptance culminated in decades of hard work and persistence by its inventor. In this story, you will hear about this man's correspondence with Bud Hilrich of Louisville Slugger Bats, Major League Baseball Commissioner Ford C. Frick, Hall of Fame player Joe Medwick, foot dragging and procrastination, and involvement by Ted Williams, the greatest hitter there ever was. This bat's inventor's name was Joseph Alfred Barnia. He was my grandfather, and this is his story. Joseph Alfred Barnia, known to many as Freddie, was born in Exeter, New Hampshire, back in 1885. As a young boy, he was athletic and enjoyed playing sports. As he grew into a young man, baseball became his passion, and he was good enough to play semi-pro ball. Between 1910 and 1922, Freddie lived and worked in the Boston, Mass region, and aside from garnering steady employment, attended both the National League's Boston Braves games, as well as the Boston Red Sox games at Fenway Park, which was newly constructed in 1912. In his writings, he states that, quote, he saw most of the future Hall of Famers that came through, unquote, meaning players such as Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson, and Honus Wagner. Sometime in the late 1910s, he moved to Manchester, New Hampshire, and on October 14, 1919, he married schoolteacher Margaret Ellis, and he became the listing department manager at McElwain Shoe Company, later International Shoe Company, which was reported at this time to be the largest shoe company in the United States. During the Roaring Twenties, Freddie and Margaret worked hard and raised their 4 children in a loving household. These 2 boys and 2 girls would go on to become an office manager with AT&T, a sports editor and associate editor with the state's largest newspaper, the Manchester Union Leader, an attorney turned Roman Catholic priest, and a Catholic nun whose calling in life led her to working with the poor in rural South Carolina. In 1944, tragedy struck when Margaret died suddenly from a heart attack. Family lore has it that her sudden passing was caused by worry over her eldest son joining the Army during World War II, just after his graduating from St. Anselm's College in Manchester. Freddie Barnia forged ahead, though, reminding me once of his old saying that, quote, Barnias aren't quitters, unquote. In 1950, he retired from the International Shoe Company. All throughout his retirement years, he remained close to the game of baseball, through his subscription with the Sporting News and through his son, Joseph Barnia Jr., who wrote his daily sports column, Barnstorming with Barnia, in the Union Leader. After settling down in his retirement life, he took up gardening and resurrected an idea which he had been tinkering with for a long time, that there could be a way to make a better baseball bat. He began this journey by going right to the top. In 1952, he received a return letter from Major League Commissioner Ford C. Frick himself, explaining to Freddie that any changes to the bat being other than round, by rule, would be a question for the Rules Committee. Mr. Frick goes on to state that, quote, long years of experimentation will prove that the present type of bat is the best that could be developed, unquote, which was probably returned as a brush-off or discouragement. But the commissioner may have underestimated Mr. Barnia's determination. At about the same time, an old business acquaintance named Harold A. Smith, who had recently retired to Miami, would begin a lengthy correspondence, initially being concentrated on the best method towards patenting Freddie's axe-handled bat idea. Letters were mailed up and down the East Coast over the next several years, with Mr. Smith using his contacts in Washington, D.C. towards investigating previously patented baseball bats and reportedly working through the patent procedure. In 1953, Mr. Smith writes that, quote, Our man in Washington assures me that you have received a patent and that you can go forward developing and marketing this idea." Unquote. By suggestion, Freddie hires a local artist to produce drawings of axe-handle bats depicting several variations that he has photographs made of. He begins making several bat models with the help of his nephew, Freddie Gallant Jr. Around this time, my grandfather begins an extensive, and I do mean extensive, correspondence with the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forestry Service, once inquiring whether or not any studies have been done on comparative strength between a round wood handle versus an elliptical one. Apparently there had not. Covering his bases, he was also informed of ash dieback and the strength of first-growth trees compared with those of later generations. Regarding the sticky issue of attempting to get Major League Baseball to revise bat-shaped rules, and per the suggestion of Commissioner Frick, he began correspondence with Rules Committee Chairman James Gallagher of the Chicago Cubs and later the Phillies, and even later still with Charlie Seeger, himself an executive with the Cubs. In his letter dated October 26, 1954 to Jim Gallagher, Freddie explains the advantages of the axe-handle bat, mainly that of reduced breakage and better control. He also mentions the concept that an elliptical shape along its major axis would be stronger than a circular shape, particularly if the wood grain ran parallel with that long axis. He points out that, quote, "practically all hand tools and implements are oval-shaped, which is proof that it conforms best to the hand grip, and should reduce bat slippage, therefore reducing possible injury," unquote. And he mentions angling the knob like that of an axe handle. Freddie has several of his bats made, and in a letter dated April 23, 1959, Joe Cronin notes that Ted Williams had tried out one in batting practice, but wasn't enthusiastic about it. Undeterred, my grandfather moved forward, noting that he left an improved version of the axe-handle bat at Fenway Park for use between June and September of 1956. Several times during the 1950s, Freddie wrote to and received letters from Mr. Cronin, current vice president of the Boston Red Sox, as well as being a past manager with the club and a one-time American League Most Valuable Player. On one of Grampy's excursions to Fenway, he attempted to personally deliver a bat to Joe Cronin, only to find that his secretary, Barbara Tyler, had stepped out and their office door locked. He then simply left his bat with a nearby police officer who later delivered the bat to Miss Tyler. As a sidebar, one of my first jobs in the late 1970s was working at a neighborhood grocery store in Manchester. One day I struck up a conversation with Ben the butcher working in the deli. And when our conversation turned to baseball, I mentioned my grandfather's axe-handle bat. Ben looked at me with a slightly surprised expression and told me that he had played high school baseball in Exeter, New Hampshire back in the 1950s and recalled an older gentleman being there with homemade axe-handle bats. I explained that that man was my grandfather and that he was there that day doing field studies on bat strength and player reaction. Now, back to Freddie. All throughout the 1950s and 60s, he kept up correspondence with Jim Gallagher and Charlie Seeger of the Rules Committee, and according to clips taken from the Sporting News, his idea was presented for consideration at Major League Baseball's Rule Committee meetings in 1953, 1956, and 1961, with some present at the 1956 meeting being intrigued by Mr. Barnia's invention. But despite these efforts, the round bat rule was never altered to allow his bat to be used legally in a game. Between 1954 and 1968, beginning with a letter to Bud Hilrich himself, my grandfather corresponded with numerous folks at H&B Louisville Slugger Bats, the world's largest bat manufacturer. And over the years of semi-cooperation, this company would claim not to be interested in the axe-handle bat due to A. difficulty with making such a bat, B. them having a current 100% capacity on the machinery, and C, not believing that this type of bat could be patented, never minding that none of their standard models held any special patented features. In the end, Hilrich and Bradsby never made one single accidental bat for my grandfather. But they were generous enough, though, to ship him wood billets. These billets were approximately 4 inches by 4 inches square and 40 inches in length, and were cut ash wood stock from which standard baseball bats could be lathed. Initially, Freddie enlisted the help from a local shop teacher, and at age 71 took an adult night course in the nearby high school, learning use of a wood lathe. One of his axe handle bat models made it into the hands of a Hall of Fame player, who had high praise for this invention. Joe Medwick played in the National League between 1932 and 1948. He was league MVP in 1937, compiled a lifetime .324 average, and to date is the last player to win the National League Triple Crown, which happened after his wonderful 1937 season. He was elected into baseball's Hall of Fame in 1968. Mr. Medwick was teaching hitting to young big league prospects at the Florida Instructional League in 1967 when he ran into Frank Ryan of Hilrich and Bradsby bats. Mr. Ryan showed Mr. Medwick one of my grandfather's bats, and he was instantly impressed, realizing it to be a unique and useful hitting tool. Freddie's first letter to Joe Medwick was to congratulate him on selection to the Hall of Fame. After Mr. Medwick inquired, my grandfather shipped him a bat, then had a second one made and airmailed to Joe at spring training in Florida. This correspondence continued until 1969, and despite Joe Medwick's endorsement, Louisville Slugger Bats would not budge in making an axe handle bat model, at least not publicly. One of my grandfather's last efforts in this regard was to set up a meeting with Charlie Seeger at Major League Baseball's headquarters on Fifth Avenue in New York City. In the summer of 1967, my grandfather was 82 years old. He purchased tickets for both himself and my brother Mike, who was about to begin his high school senior year. They departed Manchester fairly early and arrived at the New York City Port Authority bus terminal at about 1:30 p.m. From there, they made their way along the streets of the big city, carrying baseball bats in an oversized case, directly to the commissioner's office on Fifth Avenue. After this meeting with Rules Committee Chairman Charlie Seeger, they made the 5-hour return bus trip back up to their homes in New Hampshire. On August 22, 1967, Mr. Seeger wrote a letter to Frank Ryan of Hilrich and Bradsby Bats, copying John Hilrich and my grandfather, stating that he was, quote, impressed and surprised by the feel of this new bat. And he also said that, quote, perhaps this could be effectively used in baseball, unquote. My grandfather, Joseph Alfred Barnea, passed away in 1971 at age 86, never having seen his hard work and persistence come to fruition or to see his bat used in a major league game. My father, Joseph Barnea Jr., was taking a well-earned break from his editing of the newspaper sports section, and in August of 1977, Lenny Morello pinch hit for Joe's Wednesday column. Lenny Morello was a former major league player with the Chicago Cubs who had become a prominent scout. In his pinch hit column, he wrote of possessing several prized bats that he took along during hitting instruction at clinics across the country. His first prized bat was one used by Babe Ruth, with which he hit his 50th home run in 1927, the year he went on to slug 60. The second bat was one used by Ty Cobb during the 1923 season, which was gifted to him after giving a Boston Rotary luncheon speech. The third bat he spoke of in this column was an axe handle model made by my grandfather, with Mr. Murillo going on to explain that, quote, these bats have brought new excitement to me in the business of baseball, unquote. After moving west and settling down in the Bay Area, I decided to dig back into the story mainly to verify or not whether my grandfather had actually received a patent on his idea. I hired a patent attorney and asked around if anyone knew someone who could possibly carve or lathe some bat models for me. I purchased several ash wood pieces from Jordan International Lumber in Belmont, California, then delivered them to a fellow named Rick Ducher, who was co-owner of Shady Lane, a novelty shop in Palo Alto. A few weeks later, I met Rick at one of his softball practices, and he took a few cuts against live pitching with the axe handle bat for the first time. He told me right there that this bat felt heavy and strange. After repeating this bat lathing process a few more times, he referred me to a fellow named Elliot Landis, a craftsman running his own woodworking business. In June of 1987, I purchased several more cut pieces of ash wood, this time from White Brothers Lumber in the Oakland, Alameda area, and after some phone calls, set up a meeting with Mr. Landis at the San Francisco Harvest Festival. On October 18 of 1987, I took Caltran from the Palo Alto station up to the city to meet and talk with Elliot Landis of possibly taking on the axe handle bat making process. After paying the entry fee, I walked through this large indoor crafts fair with my duffel bag and 2 bats, then found Mr. Landis at his penmaker's display. I introduced myself, then gave him a brief outline on the history of the axe bat, and he agreed to lathe some bat models for me in the near future. I then left the Harvest Festival, walked the city streets, and hopped back on the Caltrain heading south. As I rode the rails, it occurred to me that I was closely following in my grandfather's footsteps, mimicking his bus trip to New York some 20 years earlier. In February of 1988, we made the drive to Winters, California, with several ash-cut wood blocks for delivery to Elliot Landis at his workshop. He immediately set up one of the pieces on his lathe and turned the block into a rounded stick. He then took this piece off the lathe and sanded the handle into an elliptical shape, being careful to have its wood grain running parallel with the longer axis. Both being satisfied, we agreed on a price point, and Mr. Landis commented that he could have the work done for me in about 4 weeks or so. In March of 1988, I received back a signed letter from my Aunt Catherine, acting as my grandfather's informal administrator. Then I forwarded this along with other pertinent information to my patent attorney, Paul Hensel. Paul then mailed the entire package to his contact in Washington, D.C., and said, quote, "We now wait 6 months or so for a response from the Patent and Trademarks Office, PTO," unquote. The next month, Mr. Landis shipped me 2 different axe model bats, one with a standard knob end and one having a flared end. In May, he then shipped 4 more lathe bats along with some unusable wood pieces of ash back to my office in Redwood City. 2 weeks after that, I contacted Easton Sports in Burlingame, California, and set up a meeting with a Mr. Mark Harkensang in their products division. At this meeting, I explained my recent efforts towards procuring a patent, and of my grandfather's work in this regard. He tells me that Easton Sports has made their own metal, oval handle bat model, and that a company called Steele's Bat Company is doing the same. Mark later mails me an article titled Design 88, a handle on the bat market, by writer Tony Imbibo. This article described recent developments in aluminum bats having an oval handle, and of the current legal battle between Steele's Bat Company and the Special Ventures Group over the rights regarding the grip of steel oval handle bat. Mark also gives me a copy of a magazine called Sport Style, and its mention of recent oval handle bat production. At our meeting, I theorized to Mark how Special Ventures Group had somehow caught wind of this idea in 1987 after I had forwarded 2 bat models to my friend Mark Laton, head trainer with the San Francisco Giants. Mr. Laton mentioned to me that he had shown these bats to a fellow named Chuck Shupp with Hilberts and Bradsby, but that they again had decided not to take this project on. In the Sports Style article, the president of Steele's Bat Company states that, quote, Special Ventures Group doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, as the oval handle bat has been around since the 1940s and the 1950s. I point out to Mr. Hawkinsang that this article is referring to my grandfather, but he reiterates that Easton Sports has looked into this idea and have decided not to pursue it at this time. In June of 1988, we received back a patent rejection letter from the PTO with their citing of a cricket bat patent in 1913. Mr. Hensel says that we can appeal this decision, and we gather additional information and return salvo back to the PTO in late 1988. This carries into 1989, when we make another appeal, mainly citing differences between the games of cricket and baseball, and the fact that nowhere in this 1913 British patent does it specifically mention the word baseball. Along with this appeal, I write how baseball has evolved over the years, and this new appeal is sent back to Washington in June of 1989. In May of 1991, Mr. Hensel calls me to say that, per their formal letter, the PTO has accepted 3 of our claims for patent. In a call with trainer Mark Laton, assistant coach Dusty Baker comes on the line. We agree for me to show current players my bat models during batting practice towards getting their comments and reactions. On October 1 of 1991, I drive to the Stick and park in the players' lot. I head into the building and meet Mr. Laton, then Dusty, explaining to him that, quote, I am here to get players' responses and comments and not their endorsements, unquote, and then we walk through the tunnel and onto the field at 4 p.m. I take the 4 axe-handle bats and set them up against their tailor-made carry case, then stand near the batting cage as rookies and subs hit first, then progress through the lineup until the starters hit last. Most players show some interest, and several take cuts against their batting practice pitcher. Their responses are generally positive, with some players pointing out that their hands rolled over sooner than usual. Catcher Kurt Manwaring said that, quote, the bat feels good once I got used to it, unquote. Jose Uribe said that, quote, it feels right like you're chopping wood and that you've got some good wood here, unquote. Terry Kennedy tells me that his dad came up with the K100 bottle fungo bat and that he, quote, shagged a lot of balls off of that bat, unquote. Looking back, Terry might have been a bit wistful, given that he was in his last week ever as an active player. Kevin Mitchell made comments like, quote, it feels like my sledge, and it feels light, unquote, but that he could not roll his hands over. He also asked whether or not I could send him a 36-ounce, 35-inch length model for his personal use, and his last comment to me was that, quote, guys used to make their own bats back in the old days, unquote. Robbie Thompson picked one up and called it a tomahawk bat, then took several cuts in the cage and added that, quote, it feels good, but it'll take some time getting used to. Several players commented in a positive way about the sledgehammer name that I had pasted on the label. Lastly, Matt Williams spent the most time with it, initially spraying line drives, then ultimately popping one over the left field fence, and then commented to me that his hands rolled over early. The home team's batting practice ended, so I gathered up the bats and followed Mr. Baker off the field and back through the tunnel. I stopped briefly to thank Mark Laton, then got into my Chevy Blazer and drove down 101, arriving at my apartment in time for the bottom of the first inning. A few weeks later, I drafted and mailed a letter of thanks to Mr. Baker for his time and patience. After drafting the proposed bat-to-ball schematics, my attorney sent the package along with a check to the PTO for the final patent acceptance. On February 18, 1992, baseball bat with oval handle is accepted and assigned patent number 5088733. Mr. Hensel delivers me a nice framed copy along with several additional sets for distribution. Next month, I start receiving junk mail, some concerning patent wall plaques and others for books on marketing your invention. On March 19, 1992, I received a phone call from a Barry Weinberger. The following evening, I received a message from a Mark Howick of the Special Ventures Group saying that, quote, I should call him back, it's important. I do return his call, and Mr. Howick explains to me his company and how they became involved with the oval handle bat back in early 1987, stating that a John Dixon from Florida had made claims to this bat design back in 1982. We discussed my meeting with Easton Sports and of the Special Ventures litigation with Steel Sports. He mentions that they intend to challenge my patent, and I respond by pointing out that my grandfather had worked on this project between the 1940s until his passing in 1972. Mr. Howick recites several law firms in the Cincinnati area that this type of bat was illegal for use in both the major and the minor leagues, and that they have contacts in Major League Baseball in an attempt to get the rules changed. And of course, I respond by mentioning my grandfather's efforts in all of this several decades earlier. We end the call after Mr. Howick says that, quote, I think we have a mutual goal here. Trust me. Later that day, I phoned my Aunt Catherine to ask if she received a copy of the patent I had mailed her, my recent call with Mr. Howick, and to be aware that some of this might also head her way, given that her home address was also on the accepted patent. Over the next few months, I started contacting wood bat manufacturers, knowing that I did not have the capacity for producing bats myself. And looming over this effort still was the sticking point of getting Major League Baseball to change their rules. I started where my grandfather had left off, with a letter to the Hilbert and Bradsby Louisville Slugger Bat Company in Kentucky. After speaking by phone with a fellow named Jay Strange, he put me in touch with Vice President Marty Archer. I then mailed him a letter pointing out the recent patent acceptance, but the reaction was the same now as it had been with my grampy, lukewarm at best. Barb from Rawling Sporting Goods mailed me an idea submission contract, but this is as far as it went with their company. I contacted a newer company called Cooper Bats, but there was no interest from them. I spoke with John Beyer of Worth Incorporated in Tennessee, and he explained that, quote, they have already looked into this, but are not interested at this time. The most interest shown at that time was from Irwin Sports, a company in Toronto, Canada. I mailed a bat model along with a patent copy, but it went no further. That summer, I would receive offers to market this intellectual property from a company called Kessler Sales Corporation out of Fremont, Ohio, and an offer for patent, trademark, and copyright infringement abatement insurance from the Intellectual Property Insurance Services Corporation in Louisville, Kentucky. But none of these outfits addressed my personal desires of having a company who could produce accidental bats, of getting Major League Baseball to adjust their rules towards acceptance of this bat, and to have my grandfather's smart idea used in a big league game. In the summer of 1993, Lisa and I made the pilgrimage to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, thoroughly enjoying our time there. After this visit, I wrote to the Hall, including a copy of Patent 5088733, asking if they had knowledge of this recent Axe Bat patent. And in a letter dated October 21 of 1993, intern Christopher Schroeder mentions that they now have a copy of it on file in their library. During the rest of the 1990s and into the early 2000s, I maintained this patent. But aside from collecting the occasional anecdotal article, action on the axe handle bat has simmered considerably. By chance, I happened to see that there was to be a History Channel program on alternative baseball bats, which I was able to videotape. Curiously, they showed our recent bat patent and displayed my bat-to-ball schematic from the patent as a negative image. During the period between 1995 and 2005, Major League hitters began experimenting in an attempt to keep up with their hard-throwing pitcher counterparts, using different types of batwood, such as maple. But what hitters discovered, unfortunately though, was that maple wood is more brittle and had a tendency to splinter more readily than ash. At this time, smaller independent companies such as Cooper Bats and Sam Bats from Canada, as well as Marucci Bats out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, sprang up, as Hillrich and Bradsby's dominance began to wane. As my grandfather understood back in the 1950s and 1960s, and as Major League Baseball and the rest of us were learning, bat breakage was becoming increasingly prevalent. More brittle maple bats, combined with a reduced supply of good ash wood, was becoming a problem in the big leagues. In 2009, and after its 17-year run, our oval handle bat patent number 5088733 had expired and was now open for use in the public domain. In 2010, Major League Baseball granted provisional use of axe handle bats in spring training, then subsequently allowed their use in regular season games that year. According to an article in the Federal Way Mirror, quote, Major League Baseball approval is a significant step in the development of this revolutionary new bat, unquote, referring to Baden Sports' Axe Bat. Somehow, someway, and somewhere around 2010, and just after the expiration of our patent, Major League Baseball decided to finally change their rules. This did not shock me, as I suspected that it was just a matter of time. What did surprise me, though, was reading that, according to a different article, quote, the axe bat concept came from the mind of Bruce Leinart as he chopped wood back in the 1990s. Per the website for Baden Sports, and per a quote from Baden's CEO, Michael Schindler, quote, the axe handle offers real benefits to players in terms of grain alignment, back control, and injury prevention, unquote. And I thought, gee, this all sounds very familiar. Having some free time during the economic downturn around 2009 and 2010, I dug back into my grandfather's files and put together a brief outlining some of the highlights and interesting tidbits in his collection, such as having Ted Williams trying out his bat, of leaving one with a police officer outside of Joe Cronin's office, his round-trip bus ride to Major League Baseball headquarters in New York at age 82, along with some of my more recent adventures while involved with this family project. When completed, I forwarded copies of this 7-page summary to family members and received positive comments and good wishes. What I wasn't aware of initially was that this outline was forwarded to local historian and columnist John Clayton. Mr. Clayton called me prior to putting together his In the City column for the Manchester Union Leader newspaper, the same paper that my father had been an associate editor for many years. Mr. Clayton's column appeared in the Union Leader on April 5, 2010, just in time for opening day. He presented his column in the form of an interview, when in reality, we had only spoken briefly, and most of his writing was based upon my 7-page summary outline. In that outline, I wrote, quote, "Time will tell how well the axe-handle bat goes over with players, or if it will even stand up to big league pitching. Either way, Joseph Freddie Barnia is smiling somewhere, knowing that his hard-fought concept, the axe-handle bat, will finally be used in a major league game," unquote. I wrote these words 15 years ago now, and following its progress, I would say that yes, it's working very much as my grandfather had predicted. I'm sure that he would smile at the thought that his invention has become a small part in Major League Baseball's attempts towards player safety, not to mention fan safety if you include the recent addition of netting in all parks. I don't have actual data, but I do watch a fair number of games each season, and I have noticed that several top players such as Mookie Betts and George Springer were early adapters of the axe-handle bat, and that they have not deviated since. I have also noticed that each team has at least one player using this type of bat, with other teams such as the Padres having several players using them, and I have yet to see an axe-handle bat break during play. But again, I don't have hard data, it's just what I'm seeing. So finally, after all these many years, my grandfather's idea is finally being put to the test, and by all indications, it is succeeding. I surely hope that you have enjoyed hearing this story as much as I have enjoyed putting it together, and that this video clears up some of the rumors and innuendo regarding the true inventor of this axe-handle bat. That man is my grandfather, Joseph Alfred Freddie Barnia.